I mentioned that I'll be holding a meeting in October on the theme of life's big questions. So this is another one that I'm working on, or have worked on for that series. Why am I here? Now, you could ask this question in several different ways, like, why are you here? All right? That'd be a good question to discuss. Why are you here tonight? Why are you here right now? That's an interesting thing to think about, but that's not what I'm thinking about. This is more of like a philosophical question. Why am I here? You know, it's an interesting thing about life that at some point we become aware of our own existence. You don't remember when it happened. You don't remember being born. But somewhere along the way, you became aware of the fact that you're here. And as someone has said, I think, therefore I am. Right? You have an awareness, and that's what you know for sure. You may not know about anything else for absolutely sure, but you know you're here because you're thinking. And you're aware of the fact that you exist. And that raises a question, why? What's the purpose? Why am I here? Why do I exist? Why was I given life? And that question can or could be asked out of, really I thought of two different contexts that this could be asked. One of them, and both of them are pretty dark, so I'm going to brace yourself for that. If you're asking this question, it might be because of that life seems hopeless, or it could be that life seems pointless. And I think those are related, but not necessarily the same thing. Let's begin by going to Job chapter 3. Job asked this question in Job 3 because he felt that life was hopeless. Because he was suffering so much, and we won't go through everything that happened to Job, but hopefully you know and you can remember the basic storyline of Job. He had, everything that could go wrong went wrong, basically. He suffered great loss, and he suffered a great personal health challenge. So he was suffering night and day, emotionally and physically. And, sometimes we skip right from chapter 2 where he says, naked I was born, naked I'll go return, blessed be the name of the Lord. And all this Job did not sin with his lips. And we jump to chapter 42 where he gets everything back, and it's like, Job did great. But in between there, he really struggled. As soon as chapter 3, he's really, really struggling. It was not an easy thing for him. And so notice what he says here, beginning in verse 11 of chapter 3. Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or why the breast that I should nurse? For then I should have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept, and I would have been at ease with kings and counselors of the earth who built ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold and filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not as a hidden stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? There the wicked cease from troubling. There the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together. They hear not the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there. The slave is free from his master. Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? That's some pretty dark thoughts, about the darkest thoughts, I would say, that somebody can have. And that's the thoughts that Job was wrestling with. So you could ask the question from Job's perspective, why am I here? If this is the way it is, if this is what life is like, if this is what it's all about, then why would I even be born? That's Job's question. Now, I want to suggest to you that we'll circle back to that. So if you can just kind of put that on the back burner, we're going to come back to that. Probably people do find themselves facing circumstances that make them relate to Job's question here, or Job's perspective. But I think a more broad way to ask this question is from a simple point of view of not understanding what life is about. Like, what is this really about? Maybe not that you're suffering greatly, or that there's some horrible thing happening, or that anything terrible is going on, but just a sense of kind of pointlessness about everything. And for that, we have another book we can go to, which is the book of Ecclesiastes. So let's go to Ecclesiastes, and that'll be our main text, but I will come back to Job's question at the end. So we go to Ecclesiastes, and we'll start in chapter 1. We're basically going to read through chapter 1 and a little bit of chapter 2. It appears the author of Ecclesiastes is King Solomon, although he's not named in the book. Verse 1 says he was the son of King David, king in Israel, or in Jerusalem. He calls himself the preacher. So verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? He's basically asking the question, what is the point of all of this? It's so much to do, so much activity, all this work, but for what end, to what gain? He goes on to describe why he thinks it's pointless. Verse 4, a generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on it circuits the wind, returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams go, there they flow. Again, what I get out of that is he's describing cycles in nature. The cycle of the sun, the cycle of the water, the cycle of generations. As we all say, it's just one big circle, right? And so everything just kind of goes around and around and around. And if you recognize that, once you step back and you recognize that, wow, this is like, it just kind of keeps on going, and people come and people go, and one day we'll all be gone, another generation will be here, and then you start to wonder, so what is the point of all of this if it's just one big circle? And, you know, I thought about we used to have a little dwarf hamster, it was Sabrina's, and it would get on his little wheel, and he would run as fast as he could go for a while, and then he would hop off. And I really thought he expected to be somewhere else, you know, when he would get off, because he would then look around, and then he would jump back on the wheel, and he'd run for a while, and he would get off. And I always felt kind of bad for him, because I think he was trying to go somewhere. But, you know, maybe that feels like life probably sometimes. It's like you just go and go and go and go and go and go and go, but it's just turning in a big circle. And what is really the point after all? And I think that's kind of what he's saying there. He says in verse 8, all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. You can't possibly say everything that needs to be said. You can't see everything that could be seen. You can't hear it all. It starts to feel exhausting. Verse 11, there's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be. So in other words, you know, whatever you do learn or accomplish, it doesn't have any lasting impact. Reminds me of like being at the ocean and building a sandcastle. It's kind of fun. When you're a kid, you build this elaborate thing and all that. But you know, if you don't know, you learn pretty quickly. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, and it's just exactly back to the way it was before you got there. All those tracks that the people leave in the sand, their footprints. The next morning, it's pristine, but that's the way life is, right? We make our indentation, we leave our mark somehow, but the world comes and turns around. And think of all the generations of Native Americans that live right here for hundreds of years. And where's the evidence of their life? Their whole life. They came and went, they built things, they had stories they told, there were exciting things they did, adventures, tragedies. No record of any of it, no remembrance of it. And one day, our life, everything that's so important to us will be the same. It'll go away, and there won't be anything left. So that you start, it's a dark place. We're going to get better, by the way. Hang with me. But it's a dark thought, and I think the author's here kind of in a dark frame of mind. He says in verse 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I have applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It's an unhappy business that God has given the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun. Behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. You know, imagine you're trying to chase down the wind. Here goes the wind. Go catch it. Run after it. Capture it. Grab it. Hold on to it. It's pointless. And that's what he's saying. And he feels like this is an unhappy exercise. that God has given humans to be busy with. So he mentions there that he tried, in verse 13, he applied his heart to seek out what was worth doing. And then in the next verses, he describes some of the things that he tried in an attempt to figure out what would be worthwhile, what would make life worthwhile and worth living. So he started out by basically education. In verse 16, I said to my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience with wisdom and knowledge. You know, learning, achieving knowledge, achieving understanding. You know, working at a school now, a lot of the people when we have graduation ceremonies, they have these regalia that shows their degrees that they've got. And mine's really, really plain because I have a bachelor's degree, so I just have the little black thing, and that's all I got. But all these other people have like stuff hanging around their neck, and they have stripes on their sleeves. And I just found out, like when I started there, that if you have a PhD, you get a special hat. Did y'all know that? Some of you knew that. I see some nods. I didn't know this. And I never wanted a PhD until I realized you got a hat with it. And I was like, that's super cool. You get like a fancy hat to wear. And now I want a PhD so I can have this hat. But you know, in that world, they place a great deal of emphasis on advanced degrees. And there's what's called a terminal degree. When you get your terminal degree, it means you've gone as far as you can go down that road. And there's a certain amount of appeal to that. Wouldn't it be cool? But let's say you can learn everything there is to know about that subject. Even then, would you know everything there is to know about it? No, you just learn something to get that degree, right? Somebody gives you a piece of paper and a hat. But would that make life worth living? And what happens when you die anyway? What if you can learn? What if you were the world's expert in something? You're still going to retire one day, and then you're going to die. And what would it have done in the end that you knew everything about that? What would it really have accomplished? And he says in verse 17, I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive this is also a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation. He who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Sometimes the more you understand about things, the sadder it gets. That's terrible, isn't it? Still an unhappy business. The next thing he says is he just tried fun. The fair's in town, by the way. Made me think about that. We can hear it we are out walking the dogs, and we can hear it from our house. The people squealing and the music thumping and booming. And, you know, do you remember, there was a Dr. Seuss story about the Sneetches. And a man came to town. Anyway, he helped him. And as he drove away, he had like every dollar that Sneetches had in his little cart. And he's driving away. And the money is like floating off into the air behind him. And I always think of that when I think of the fair. I think they fleece like the whole community, and they must leave town just with bags of money because everything is so expensive. Anyway, it's like a lot of fun, and maybe that's what life is about. Maybe the point of life is to have as much fun as you can pack into your time under the sun. George Strait sang a song. He said, I ain't here for a long time, I'm here for a good time. That was the chorus of it. But at verse 2 in that, he said, folks are always dreaming about what they like to do, but I like to just do, but I like to do just what I like. I'll take the chance, dance the dance. It might be wrong, but then again, it might be right. There's no way of knowing what tomorrow brings. Life's too short to waste it. I say bring on anything. I ain't here for a long time. I'm here for a good time. So I don't know if that's George Strait's philosophy, but in the song, the author's philosophy is that, hey, what I'm going to do is fill my days with as much good time as I can squeeze into them. And I think that Solomon tried that too. Verse 1, I said in my heart, chapter 2, verse 1, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. Behold, this is also vanity. I said of laughter, it's mad. Of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart to cheer my body with wine. My heart still guided me with wisdom, how to lay hold on folly till I might see what good is for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. So he found this self-indulgence, pleasure in and of itself, didn't lead to any meaningful satisfaction or accomplishment or sense of purpose in life. That wasn't fulfilling. So maybe, and this, I think, as we go through these, you might think, now maybe that's the thing. The next thing he thought about was building stuff. Verse 2 of chapter 4, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made for myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. Lots of people buy into this idea. They have some dream of something they would love to build. If they're super wealthy, that may have your name on it. You know, this is now the whatever library at the University of whatever, or this something building downtown, and it's got your name on it. Maybe you accomplished some big thing that you've always dreamed of, and you know, you're Mr. Wrigley and you build a baseball stadium or whatever. That seems like a purpose for some people, but that, again, I don't even know who Wrigley was. And those people come and go, and you know, what is the purpose of it then? The next thing is probably the one that most people chase after, which is collecting wealth. Verse 7, I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of men. A lot of people spend their life treasure hunting, whether literally or through other means, or maybe by saving and planning and piling it up somewhere. And so that raises the question, is that my purpose? Is the reason I'm aware of myself and I'm alive is to pile up as much stuff in one place and put my name on it? But then what happens, of course? You die. And think about it. Have you ever thought about like all the stuff that's here has been here from the beginning? And so if all you can do is dig some stuff up out of the ground or put it together in some way and pile it over in your corner and say it's yours till you're gone, and it'll get redistributed to somebody else. It'll still be here, but you'll be gone. You can't, as we say, take it with you. So you can only try to claim some of it for a period of time. And again, what is the point? So verse 9, he says in summary, I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. Behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Even in all that, he did all those things that most people can only dream of doing. He did it. He actually did it all. But he decided at the end of it all that it was just pointless and empty. Even, surprisingly, living wisely. Notice what he says in verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. What can the man do who comes after the king? Or what has already been done? Only what has already been done. Then I saw there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there's more gain in light than darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, this is also vanity. For of the wise, as of the fool, there's no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after the wind. That's terrible, isn't it? Job was hating life for one reason, because he was suffering so. The Solomon was hating life because it seemed so pointless. So he comes to this conclusion, verse 24, there is nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases God, he's given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he's given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This is also vanity, striving after the wind. So far, by the end of this chapter, Solomon's come to this conclusion. About all there is to this life is to do some work and take some pleasure in your toil and enjoy a good meal. And that's about all he found that was really of any value. And the rest of it is all emptiness and striving after the wind. So is that it? That doesn't really answer the question why I'm here. You're here to work a little bit and eat some food? That leaves us kind of a little feeling empty, right? That's the whole point of me being me. Well, we're going to skip ahead several chapters to the conclusion. Let's go to chapter 12. Just for sake of time, we won't go through the whole book. But he comes to this conclusion at the very, 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 very end. Thankfully for us, he doesn't leave us hanging on that note of desperation and darkness. The last two verses. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. The whole duty of man. I think literally it's just the whole of man. But people take that to mean if it's the whole of man, it's like this is your whole reason. This is your whole obligation. This is your duty. It's why you were given life. This is the answer to the question. To fear God and keep his commandments. That is the reason you exist. That's the reason why you draw breath. Now, let's think about that for a minute. Why is that the reason to exist? To fear God and keep his commandments. Well, let's go back to Genesis 1. We've been studying that in our Wednesday night series. We've had speakers who've come and talked to us about, so far, creation and marriage on Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. If you've missed those lessons, they're on our YouTube page, and I would encourage you to check them out. Some of this will be a little bit of review. But notice when God made man, in verse 26 of chapter 1, he said, let us make man in our image. And I keep emphasizing that, and it keeps coming up. But it's important for all of these questions. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. There was something special about human beings because he had already made everything else, and then he stopped and said, now we're going to do something different. We're going to make something in our own image. I'm going to make man in my own image. There's something godlike in us, and it becomes apparent, even though that's not spelled out, what is godlike in us, but it becomes apparent in the immediate following chapter that humans have the ability to know God and to communicate with God and to hear God, to understand God on some level. So we come to chapter 2, and we see in verse 15, the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work and keep it. So work, again, that's what Solomon figured out. That is part of our original purpose. But the Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it you shall surely die. So God made this people. He gave them a few tasks. One was kind of exercising dominion over the place and working it and keeping the garden, and man was put on the top of all that. But also, he put a tree there and said, don't eat of this tree. And we learn from that God gave man some freedom of will, some ability to make moral choices that doesn't apply to any of the rest of creation so far as we can tell. But humans have the ability to understand God and to understand God's will, and then we have the ability to observe and make choices about what we want to do. And that's really what it means to be human in some degrees. And that's what it means to be conscious, I think. It's to be able to take in information about the environment and make choices for myself. And we all know that we do that. And God gave them a choice by putting this tree there. And what that means is they could either choose to fear God and keep his commandment, or they could choose to disregard God and break his commandment and face the consequences of that. And of course, that's what they did. And that caused them to be separated from God. So what we learn from this, and I thought about at this point, there's about 100 ways that you could go with this lesson. Because I thought, wow, this is the beginning point of the whole rest of the story of the Bible. But if we just use it to consider why is fear God and keep his commandments our essential reason for existing, and I think we can see that we were created at the very beginning with the capacity to have a relationship with our Creator, with the capacity to know him. But that requires fearing and obeying him and being in harmony with his will. That's what John would say again in his epistle, by this we know that we have come to know him if we do his commandments. So when we live in harmony with God, we can know God, we can enjoy a relationship with God. That's what God desires from us. That's what he wants. He wants us to have a relationship with him. That's why he created us, I believe, so that we could enjoy a relationship with him. And we can glorify him, but we do that not when we disobey and ignore him and pretend he doesn't exist, but we do that when we acknowledge him and we humbly submit to him. Then we can enjoy a relationship with God, and that gives us a sense of purpose. Now, to Job's question, I do believe there is a great satisfaction and joy and peace that comes with understanding and discovering our purpose for living and then living by it. In other words, if we know that that's why I'm here, to fear God and keep his commandments, and if I do that and live that way, I believe the Bible teaches that in general terms, there are great blessings that come with that. But what if you're doing the right things and you're fearing God and keeping his commandments, but life becomes very bitter because of sorrow or disease or sickness or loss or any number of things? That's what happened with Job. Job was doing the right things, but life, he came to a point where he said, why is it like this? Because of all the horrible things he was experiencing. What is the point then? And that's where I think we need to add one more layer to this answer. Yes, we're here to fear God and keep his commandments, but there's one more piece of the puzzle that will make Solomon's question make sense and Job's question make sense if he had known it. And that's in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Let's go over there. The fact is, there's more to life than what we experience in this life. There is an eternal life. And without that, then it is really hard to make sense of anything. But with that perspective, it allows us to not lose hope. So 2 Corinthians 4, beginning in verse 16, Paul says, so we do not lose heart. Earlier he had said we are struck down, we are beaten, we are forsaken, all these horrible things happen, but we don't lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Now let's just pause for a second there. When Paul says light, momentary affliction, he's talking about the things that he had endured, and he lists those in a couple of places. And if there's anybody in all the Bible that could maybe go toe-to-toe with Job, I think Paul would probably say, no, not me. I think Paul would probably say, I don't know that Paul would hold himself up as having suffered like Job did. But if you're looking for another example of somebody that suffered immensely, I think you could make an interesting comparison of what Paul endured and what Job endured. And yet Paul takes all of those things that happened to him and describes it like this: light, momentary affliction. And in what sense was it light and momentary? It's light and momentary in comparison to what's coming. And that's what he says. Verse 17, this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal, that's the contrast to momentary, an eternal weight, that's the light, of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. If you limit your perspective to what you can see, you could easily reach the conclusion that Solomon did, that life is pointless, or that Job did, that life is hopeless. You could easily come to those conclusions if you limit your perspective to what you can see in this life. But Paul says we do not lose heart, which is what that would be, to decide that life is pointless or hopeless. We don't reach that conclusion because we are looking forward to an eternal weight of glory. And we see these things as light and momentary. It's passing by. It's going to pass by. Life is going to pass by. And then there is something that we look forward to. And that's related to fearing God and keeping his commandments. Because if we have come to know God now, that we can look forward to eternity in his presence. And that is ultimately the big picture. And if we don't do that, nothing else matters. Let's end on Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8. As you turn over there, just consider the fact of this question, why am I here? It's really sad, and it's apparent that there are people who consider that question and come to the conclusion there is no reason to be here. And that's terrible, isn't it? But we know why we're here. And we understand our purpose, and that makes life not pointless. And we understand where we're going, and that makes life not hopeless. And that's the joy of knowing God, and that comes with fearing him and keeping his commandments. Jesus himself says in Mark 8, beginning in verse 34, calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if any would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his soul, his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's sake will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? It is quite possible that Solomon was nearly, if not in that circumstance, of gaining everything and losing his soul. I have hope for him because of the last two verses of chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes. I hope that represents his final state in life, that he did come around to that conclusion. It appears that he did, and that gives me hope for him. But if he didn't come to that conclusion, then he would have gained the whole world and lost his soul, and that's pointless. So we know why we're here. You're here to fear God and keep his commandments. That gives your life purpose, and it gives your life hope, because it points to a bright future that's still waiting for us, even if this life does become painful. If there's anyone tonight who needs to make something right in your life, we certainly would be glad to help if you will let us know as we stand and sing.
Softly and tender.